Again, appreciate you all being here. I hear you guys can hear me. My name is Ricky Shabazz. I'm a specialist with Navionics. I apologize for being a little late, or getting started late, but we do want to get to all your questions about this technique that I have used throughout the country and been very fortunate to win a lot of money on it. Was able to fish with some anglers from Japan who brought this over. I would say I started fishing the Neko Rig in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so this is a technique that I am very well familiar with, and I want to share with you how I use the Neko Rig and certainly answer any of your questions that you may have about it. Again, my name is Ricky Shabazz. I'm a marine specialist with Navionics. A little information about me: I'm a West Coast tournament angler, although I do have a day job. I have to admit that I made a mistake in setting up this webinar. I forgot to change the time from East Coast to West Coast time. So this webinar was actually supposed to be happening at 6:30 Pacific, but I forgot to change it to Eastern, and so we're getting started a little late, and I apologize. Of course, it's 3:40 or so on the West Coast. We were supposed to begin this webinar at 6:30 on the West Coast, so I'm scrambling a little bit, but we'll have a great conversation about fishing. Located in Southern California, I fished the FLW, Costas, the Wild West Bass, number of team tournaments, happen to work at a community college. This is about education. I'm going to be talking about products, but I'm not trying to sell you anything other than help you catch more fish. If you have questions, and people have already been emailing me, you can email me at rshabazz@navionics.com. You see my website there. You see my Facebook information. Happen to be fortunate enough to be partners with some great companies, Anglers Marine, Ranger Boats, so on and so forth. And so let's get into the subject. I've kept you all long enough. I'm going to talk about 20 or 30 minutes and then take questions for 20 or 30 minutes. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available via navionics.com. We also have a YouTube channel at navionics.com, so it'll be available in a couple of days. I'm going to go over the Neko Rig, baits and rigging, equipment, techniques. I'm going to show you some locations that this technique will work. If anyone has questions, you can click on chat at the bottom of the screen at any time during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to start reviewing the questions and answering it. This is set up to be a PowerPoint presentation, and then toward the end is where I'll start taking the questions. But if you have them, you can start asking them. In the event that I don't get to your question, or if you want to ask questions offline, you have my email right there, rshabazz@navionics.com. I love talking fishing, and so I would love to be able to get to your questions. And interesting enough, you know, I caused a little bit of controversy on the internet this week when I was promoting this webinar as to whether or not I was promoting the Wacky Rig or the Neko Rig. And very simply, as I've been taught by some of the originators of the Neko Rig, the Neko Rig very simply is placing some kind of lead weight in the head of a bait. Now, I have seen anglers put the weight in the tail, in the egg sac. I've experimented with those things myself, and I always go back to the Neko Rig being some kind of plastic bait with usually a nail weight insert in the head of the bait. What you see here is a VOSS, V-O-S-S. You can get it at Tackle Warehouse screwing weight. I have modified the Neko Rig to sometimes have a screwing weight. It's something we do on the West Coast. Either way, this is what I consider all to be the Neko Rig. And now I know there's some traditionalists out there who may not agree with me, but very simply, the Neko Rig consists of some kind of weight insert into the head. Now, this is different than, say, a shaky head. And it falls different. It has a different profile. We wacky rig the bait. Now, I know a lot of people play with the placement of the hook. Certainly I do. But I tend to always come back 90+% of the time and placing that hook just below the egg sac. And we're going to go into all of the rigging and things later. This technique will outfish a drop shot in 0 to 25 all day, every day. Now, I'm saying that not considering cover, right? This is an exposed hook. You can Texas rig it. Some anglers like to use a some kind of hook system that makes it weedless. I tend to not do that. If I want to make the bait weedless, I will just not penetrate the hook. I'll bury the hook in the plastic if I want to make it weedless. It's not weedless in the true sense of the word. So the drop shot, no doubt, will outfish this bait in areas where you can't fish it effectively. If it's open, if it's rocky, if I can throw this bait without getting hung up, in 0 to 25, the Neko rig will outfish a Senko and it will outfish a drop shot, hands down, primarily because the fish are conditioned to seeing a drop shot and they're conditioned to seeing a Senko. What you see here is also the system we developed using shrink tubing, and I started using shrink tubing about 10 or 15 years ago. The shrink tubing will decrease the likelihood that your hook will go back into the bait rather. This technique is subject to the wacky rig hook going into the plastic or the plastic going onto the hook, and you lose a lot of fish. Doing that, particularly if you don't use the shrink tubing. A lot of people say, well, what size shrink tubing? Just go to Home Depot, Lowe's, and get a multi-pack of different sizes, because the size is going to be dictated by the size of the worm that you're using. So what you see here, and it's actually my good friend Joe Uribe's hands. Hopefully he doesn't have a contract for using his hands, but I'm using his hands. I featured him in an article a number of years ago about the Neko rig. And so I use this photo a lot. So what you see is a shrink tubing on the right. You see a ball screw-in head. And on the left, you see a zoom trick worm. Green pumpkin, I tend to use natural cobblers and a one-eye Gamakatsu drop side hook. That's the hook that I use. Certainly, there are a lot of great hooks on the market. Use whatever you're comfortable using. Here's another bait that we use that's new to the market. Matter of fact, a lot of anglers may not even be aware of it, that Daiwa has partnered with Yamamoto to have its own line of baits. That's not the greatest picture. That's my team partner, Tony Lane, holding about a 9-pounder, almost 10-pounder, caught on the 5-inch Neko fat worm. And so this worm, if I had a better picture of it, looks like a Senko in the head, and then it actually has a different tail than a Senko. So it has that shivering fall of a Senko, but then it has a tail of a normal plastic worm. Again, you see an O-ring here instead of a shrink tube, and we always either going to use a shrink tube or an O-ring, and what that does is it allows better hook placement, and it allows for the hook to not go back into the plastic. Now, it will periodically, but it decreases the likelihood that the hook will penetrate and go back into the plastic. That happens a lot with this technique if you don't use an O-ring or shrink tube. And so what you see there is a new worm by Daiwa called a fat Neko worm. We've been catching a lot of fish. It's on the market. You get it at Tackle Warehouse, your local retailers. It's fairly new. It's kind of secret. A lot of people don't know about the worm. And so there's a hot tip right there. But in terms of other baits, we experiment with whatever your favorite worm or creature bait. What you see here is a Missile Fuse 4.4, Brush Hog, Robo Worm, Slim Senkos. I'm not sure if a lot of my East Coast colleagues are aware of this Slim Senko. Out West, we kill them on Slim Senko. It's a different profile bait. You see that Slim Senko all the way. This is the Slim Senko right there. Hopefully you can see that. Jackal Flick Shake Worm. I had a lot of controversy on the internet over the weekend that the Jackal Flick Shake, that was the wacky rig, not a Neko rig. We will put a nail weight in the head of a Jackal Flick Shake and catch more fish because it creates a different fall. I tend to be using natural colors, the green pumpkins, the shad patterns. By and large, the number one color that I use is green pumpkin candy, like a brownish green with some flake in it. Again, using a one-eye drop shot hook, but that'll be determined based on the size. If I'm using a larger profile bait, I'll go up to a 2-aught or a 3-aught. So the size of the hook will be determined based on the bait that you're using. Again, you see the Yamamoto Senko, missile-based fuse, all kind of baits. You know, again, O-ring, nail weight. These are your basic foundation of using or creating the Neko Rig. Let's dive a little deeper. I primarily use a Lunker City nail weight. Now, there are people out there who like to use a tungsten weight. I lose a lot of these baits. And so it's a lot more affordable, economical to use a normal lead Lunker lure nail weight. Now, some of you tackle junkies out there, if you want to use a tungsten weight and lose $5 or $6 every time you get hung up, then by all means do that, but it's not necessary. I use the 3/32 weight about 99.9% of the time, and I'll either use the entire weight or I'll cut off this little section right here of the weight. Just depends. I traditionally am using 6 or 8 pound tests. I will go up to 10 pound tests if I'm on lakes that have larger fish. And this is a big fish technique. I will tie a uni to uni knot with braid. I traditionally use J braid, using an improved clinch knot on the hook. When I'm around wood or docks, I use straight floral. I found that the braid will cause the bait to sail when you're skipping, and it creates a lot of drama if you make a bad skip and you wrap that braid around somewhere. So if I'm around wood or docks, I'm going to use straight floral. I'm not going to use a leader. But if I'm in open water around rocks, then I'll use a leader. And when I say a leader, I'm talking about tying 6 to 10 pound fluorocarbon line to 20 pound braided line. That braided line gives you better feel on the bottom. And this technique is very different. Typically you're going to outfish the drop shot. Yeah, we talked about shrink tubing and O-rings. We have a couple pictures right here of some baits. What you see there is a traditional Senko. I think you have a 5-inch Senko, a 6-inch Senko, a 5-inch Senko. You see a Zoom trick worm, and then you see a Yamamoto cut-tail worm. Hook placement, again, near the egg sac, near the weight. You can catch fish in the tail. 99% of the time, what you see there is where I hook the bait. I'll traditionally pre-rig 30 to 40 baits because I don't mind losing them, which is why I'm using lead versus tungsten. And again, if you want to make the bait weedless, you just what we call texpose the hook, so you don't bring the hook point out of the plastic. I will use fish attractant. I don't believe in it, but I use it. Traditionally, I'm using Bang or Smelly Jelly, and I'll put that in the bag with 30 or 40 baits and let it marinate. And this is the picture that caused a lot of controversy on the internet this week. Oh, that's a wacky rig. That's not a Neko rig. That bait has a nail in the head, which makes it and qualifies it as a Neko rig. In terms of baits, in terms of tackle, I use Daiwa, but again, there's a lot of great tackle on the market. Use whatever you're comfortable with. I traditionally use spinning tackle because I'm using 6-pound test most of the time. And so I use a Daiwa Steez rod, a ballistic spinning reel. I like a larger spinning reel, 2500 size, that allows me to have a lot more line on my reel. 6-pound test for highly pressured fish, and traditionally, if I'm fishing a place like the California Delta or Clear Lake, or maybe I'm back east and I'm fishing a lake like San Rayburn or some of the Kentucky Lake, then I will go up to 10-pound or even 12-pound but I'll still be using a spinning rod. I just like the drag system and the ability to cast better with the spinning rod, because traditionally this is a light bait. Works best, I found, from 0 to 25. I have caught fish in deeper than 25 feet. I would say the majority of the fish that I catch, a large majority, I catch on the sink. And it's a fairly light bait. And so I lose bottom contact in water deeper than 25 feet. Not saying it won't work in 35 or 40 feet. It will, but you don't have as much bottom contact. And I've found that the key to this bait is they're going to either hit it on the fall or they're going to hit it when the bait's on the bottom. And it's harder to keep the bait on the bottom because of how light it is when it's in deeper than 25 feet. And there's really one of three ways that I'm going to fish this bait. I'm either going to dead stick it, which means I'm going to throw it out there and just let it fall to the bottom and sit, 60 seconds, minute, 2 minutes. If that doesn't work and they're not biting it, dead sticking, then I'm going to shake it. I'm going to go throw it out there, let it hit the bottom, and do what we call a slack line shake. I'm going to shake my rod tip and shake that bait in place, which is why you need it to be on the bottom. And if that's not working, last but not least, I'm going to drag it. Maybe I marked some fish on my fish finder. They didn't bite on the fall. They didn't bite on the shake. Then I'm going to back off the spot that I marked the fish, make a good cast, and use my trolling motor to drag the bait into the strike zone or into the area that I'm marking fish. Those are really the three ways that I fish it, either on the dead stick, the shake, or the drag. This bait works year round. You want to keep your rod high. You want to use a slack line shake. And you want a reel set. It's an open hook, so you don't need to set the hook like you're flipping or you're on a topwater bait. What you want to do is once you feel the bite, you just want to reel until your line tightens up, and then the fish, you feel the weight of the fish. This is a big fish technique. This is the biggest fish of the tournament for FLW at Clear Lake, just under 10 pounds. Caught that fish on 10-pound test. With a Zoom finesse worm on the Neko Rig. Let's talk about location now. Traditionally, we're looking for places like humps, channel swings. I fish a lot of off the bank type spots. Even though this says 90 feet, this is one of my local lakes, Diamond Valley, that traditionally is down. The water's down, and so this hump is actually in about 25 feet of water. This will be the type of spot that I'm looking for on my fish finder to fish the Neko Rig. This is the actual spot that I caught that almost 6-pounder at Lake Cascade in California. We won that tournament, catching all of our fish on the Neko Rig. Everybody was drop shotting. Drop shotting is very big out west, but in 0 to 25, this Neko Rig will outfish a drop shot all the time. So we were going behind people and catching, we probably caught 25, 30 fish that day when everybody was getting 5 or 6 bites. That's because everybody's using the same technique. We come behind them with the Neko Rig, light line, 6-pound test, fishing a channel swing over a hump, and that 6-pounder bit, and we won the tournament. This is that same spot. I run a Lowrance. This is a screenshot off of the Lowrance. You mark the spot. We caught that fish. Actually, that fish came out about 30 feet of water, and it came off of the drag technique. So we threw it out in the deeper water and dragged the bait uphill, and that fish bit, and it's game on. Another kind of spot we would fish the Neko Rig is off of points. Again, this is Diamond Valley, so even it looks like 130 feet. This point rather. This point is only in about 25 feet, which shows that the lake is down about 110 feet. Having good electronics is important in terms of catching fish on a Neko Rig. You can't catch them if you can't find them. And so using good electronics is important. I like to sync my electronics with my tablet and my phone. And so I'm running a Navionics app in both my tablet and my phone. And what that allows me to do, if you're like me, you got a job, you're in meetings, you're traveling, I can put waypoints on my phone or my tablet that look good for lakes that I'm going to fish, and then connect that data to my electronics when I get in my boat via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and those waypoints will upload into my unit, and I can go straight to those spots. And you can see that spot right there, which is a break. This is actually Clear Lake. This is a great spot for Neko Rig. This is the spot that 9-pounder came off of, so it's a break. You see the bait right there. You see bait right there. You see that is a bass. I get a lot of questions about what does a bass look like on the screen, and that is what a bass looks like. And so, planning your trips out is very important. Again, I'm going to switch to the questions, and I apologize. I know I talked a lot. I was trying to make up time for being late, and having this challenge with the difference between West Coast and East Coast. There's my contact information. Ricky Shabazz, even though it says Paul on the screen, that's our boss at Navionics. I'm a marine specialist with Navionics. You can reach me via email, rshabazz@navionics.com. I'm going to dive into some questions because this is about your questions. And so let me get to the questions. Jim, how has Diamond Valley been treating me lately? I actually haven't been to Diamond Valley in some time. I've been just moved to San Diego. Matter of fact, moved into a new house, still unpacking. And so haven't been to Diamond Valley, but my friends have been there. They've been catching them on the Slim Senko, on the Neko Rig, catching big ones, 6, 7, 8 pounders. The lake is very fertile right now. It's producing some big weights. It's a good time to go to Diamond Valley. Unfortunately, just started a new job, moved to San Diego. I haven't had a chance to get up to Diamond Valley, but if I was there, I'd be throwing that Neko Rig, either Zoom Trick Worm, Zoom Finesse Worm, Missile Base Worm, or that new Daiwa Neko Worm is a great bait. Would I fish the Neko Rig around grass? Absolutely, I fish the Neko Rig around grass. Depends on what kind of grass we're talking about. Of course, you need to have openings in the grass. You need to have points in the grass. You need to have channel swings in the grass. The Neko Rig doesn't excel around thick grass where you would be like punching or throwing a frog, but it definitely excels around grass that you can get a bait through. That'll be a type of structure that I would probably not expose the hook, but keep the point of the hook embedded in the plastic until I get a bite. Do I ever use a rattle? I've experimented, Timothy, with a rattle in the worm, and I've just resolved in that I don't need a rattle, but certainly you can experiment and determine whether the fish are responding. A rattle can either be good or it can be bad, and I've just decided I catch so many fish on the Neko Rig, it don't really need a rattle, and so haven't really needed to do that, but that is a great question. I have experimented with that, haven't necessarily needed to do that. I'm gonna switch over to the chat. It looks like folks, let's get to the chat. Let me see. Jim, does it make a difference on which way the hook point faces? Yes. Great question, Jim. And you saw in the pictures that you really want the hook pointed up. So let me go back, if I could, to the PowerPoint, and let me try to show you a bait. Actually, there it is. Okay, let me move this out of the way. Let me just close that and put this out of the way. So Jim, that is a perfect picture of how you would rig it. You see the hook is pointed up. And so that is the way that I fish it about 90% of the time. However you do it, you want the hook point faced up. And so that's an example. Hopefully you can see that picture of what it looks like. Great question. Do you use stick baits at all when you use the Neko? Yes, Rob, you see two pictures of Senkos. And so a Senko stick bait, same difference. Yes, use a lot of Senkos, use a lot of slim Senkos. If you're not familiar with the slim Senko and you want to start beating your club partners or winning some tournaments on your local lake, go get you some 5-inch slim Senkos, put it on 6-pound tests, use it, without a weight, fly lining, and use it on the Neko Rig. You will be thoroughly impressed. There'll probably be some people mad at me for even talking about the Slim Senko if you're not aware of it. Jim, do you ever use weedless hooks? I never use weedless hooks, but I know, Jim, a lot of anglers that do. I just have created a system with the shrink tubing or the O-ring where if I want to make the bait weedless, I will bury the hook of the head of the hook, the point of the hook rather. I'll bury the point of the hook in the plastic so that it doesn't come out. I found that to be successful. I don't really like any of the weedless hooks on the market. I'm partial to this Gamakatsu drop shot hook. I've caught fish over 10 pounds with that hook on 6-pound tests, and they don't make that hook in a weedless model that I like. So I can make the bait weedless by just burying the hook point in the plastic. Sean, what kind of rod do I use? Again, I use a Daiwa Steez, or there's a new Daiwa Elite Series, the gray rods. By and large, what you want, if I'm fishing 6-pound tests, I want a medium light rod that has a backbone but a lot of tip because I'm using light line. If I'm going to say 10-pound test because I'm on Clear Lake or the Delta or Rayburn or a lake with a lot of structure and cover, then I will go to a 7-foot medium heavy. You really don't want to go any heavier than a medium heavy. Great question, Sean. Any other questions out there? And I want to make sure that, again, this is about you catching fish. This technique is a great technique to use in places that you would throw a shaky head, to use in places that you would drop shot, to use in places around docks and cover. This technique catches them. And if you've never used it and you're in a region where people are not familiar with the Neko Rig, you will be surprised at how many fish this will catch. Are the slides available for review? Yes, James. After this presentation, this entire PowerPoint will be available on the Navionics YouTube channel. You'll get an email telling you how to access that after the PowerPoint. Do you talk about the shrink tubing method? Can you talk? The shrink tube really is to keep the hook in place and to lessen the likelihood of the bait rotating over your hook. So when I started using this technique, I was taught by several Japanese anglers. A lot of Japanese anglers come to the West Coast when they come bass fishing. And so if anybody knows Hideki is the original lure designer for Reaction Innovations, or he designed a number of lures. A good friend of mine, we're friends on Facebook. He's the one who taught me the Neko Rig. He's kind of the father of it on the West Coast in terms of bringing it to the United States. We use shrink tube to keep the hook in place, to keep the bait from rotating back on the hook. You won't totally, entirely eliminate that, but you'll drastically reduce the chances that the bait will rotate back on the hook if you're not using shrink tube or an O-ring. Let's see. Can I talk more about skipping the Neko Rig? Yes. It's harder to skip it with this Voss weight, but with a normal nail weight in the head, I skip the bait. Docks, bathrooms, anything that's floating, the Neko Rig will catch fish. Because it has like a floating fall, and then the fish, and if you're a good skipper and the fish are not used to seeing the Neko Rig underneath anything that's floating, bathrooms, docks, retaining wall, whatever. I skip the bait a lot. Great question. Let me see here. Get into all your questions. Talked about that. I don't heat the shrink tube. Some of my friends do. I don't think it's necessary to heat it, and I don't want to risk that smell from the lighter and heating it, coming onto my baits. What brand of slim Senko do you use? The original, a Yamamoto. As far as I know, they're the only ones who make a slim Senko. I could be wrong. Yes, Jim, works great in Minnesota, works great. Seems like it would take forever to get a 3/32 weight. It doesn't. The light line 6-pound test allows that 3/32 weight to fall to the bottom a lot quicker than you think. That's why you want to use slack line. It'll get down there. How do you keep it from getting hung up in brush in lakes like San Vicente? Again, Kevin, the way that I do that is by not exposing the hook. So I actually won big bass in San Vicente last year at the Anglers Marine Tournament. And in fact, last year I think I had 3 or 4 second place finishes. Couldn't get the W, but it had 3 or 4 second place finishes at San Vicente using the Neko Rig and a Zoom finesse worm. And caught big fish of the tournament at least 3 times, 5+ pounders, using the Neko Rig. And you will get hung up, hell, but you'll get hung up at San Vicente. It's a forest underneath the water. But the way you avoid or lessen your chances of getting hung up is by not exposing the hook point. Just barely bringing the hook point at the surface of the worm. So when you get a bite, you hook the fish. I base the size of shrink tube to the bait. So you see, hopefully on your screen, several different size baits. A 5-inch Senko is one size, and I apologize, guys, that I don't know the names of the sizes of the shrink tube, but I can tell you how I buy it. I just go to Home Depot and get a variety pack. And based on the sizes that are in that variety pack, that's the size shrink tube that I match up with the size bait that I'm using. Hopefully that helps. Do I drop the Neko Rig with an open bail? I would say about 90% of the time I'm casting, but we do a lot of vertical, or what we call fishing, game fishing, video game fishing is what the term I was looking for, where we will be over the fish and we mark a fish on our fish finder, we open the bail and just drop the bait. That does work too, but by and large, I'm casting. I'm either skipping it, casting it, so that it can, I can work it back, either dragging it, dead sticking it, or shaking it. I use a lot of braided leader to fluorocarbon. It gives you more sensitivity. It saves money, but I don't do that around docks or brush, because that braided line does not like docks or brush, and I do a lot of skipping. And for some reason, I found that the braided line sails on you more than fluorocarbon. You know, Net Rig versus the Neko Rig. You know, I have to admit, I have not caught on to the Net Rig phenomenon. Traditionally, when I see people using a Net Rig, they're using a 3-inch smaller profile bait. I think a Net Rig has its place. It's a different fall. It's a different look. I haven't really used the Net Rig, so I can't comment on it. The James, the Neko Rig is a spotted bass killer. It works on spotted bass. It works on largemouth. It works on smallmouth. It's a technique that the fish haven't seen. And you will catch a lot of fish in that 0 to 25 behind people, particularly if they're not using it. When Tom, when I cast, I do not close my bail, and I ensure that I have slack line. And that's something I do with any plastics when I'm fishing. If I'm flipping, I want to use a slack line because the fish's lateral line can feel the tension if you don't have slack. And so it makes having slack allows the bait to have a lot more natural fall. Again, guys, I appreciate you all being on the webinar. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me at rshabazz@navionics.com. This webinar is being video recorded, and so it will be uploaded in a couple of weeks, if not days, onto navionics.com and our YouTube video. Take a look at the website for more information on other webinars. We offer a lot of free information. This is about you catching fish and helping you. Appreciate you all listening. If I didn't get to your question, you have questions, feel free to email me. I would love to be able to answer your questions. Good luck out there. Be safe. Thanks for attending. Good luck to you.